With the penultimate chapter of JJK dropping tonight, I figured let's go through one last series of questions, thoughts, and predictions from you guys. So, spoilers beware. And to kick things off today, we've got this theory from Jerilosu, and y'all pause to read it, but it basically deals with the whole Yuta Kinjaku Gojo situation. He's thinking that Rika perhaps cut some sort of deal with Kinjaku, who would have still been existing in some form or fashion within Yuta due to Rika having eaten Kinjaku's brain. And we know due to his nuance of that copy swap technique, maybe he still existed within there via cursed object or whatever, right? But the long and the short of it is that Rika made some sort of deal with Kinjaku to help heal Yuta and bring him back. And then in return for all of this, Kinjaku actually went into Gojo's body, perhaps via a binding vow with Yuta. Now, I certainly think this would be interesting, and I would assume be setting up a part two, which I would be here for. The only main issue I have with this is Yuta making a binding vow with Kinjaku to put him in Gojo's body. I don't think Yuta would be cool with that, and in whatever world that he would hypothetically do that, I don't think he would have been as chill as we saw him in the previous chapter. I think he would have been like freaking out or warning his friends. Now, maybe it was part of the binding vow that he couldn't say anything, but even still, I feel like we would notice some reaction from him. But, you know, Rika cutting some sort of binding vow to help bring Yuta back would certainly make sense to me, and we still don't really know, like, what exactly became of that situation, and I expect to find out hopefully a little bit more in these final two chapters, but we'll see. I would absolutely love if we had a Kinjaku return in some form or fashion. Next up, Depthscape says, do you think we could have imposed some sort of binding vow to allow for more swaps at the cost of not being able to do it for a few months? And if so, would allowing more people to learn certain techniques actually be helpful? And this is interesting because the limiting factor wasn't it was really everyone else. Now, we don't really know why, but like a body soul swap can only happen twice per month or whatever. And that seems to be a limit on people's like souls, for lack of a better word, as opposed to the technique itself. So I'm not sure we would be capable of constructing a binding vow on his end to alleviate that. At least that's how I understand the machinations there. But also, would they have been able to learn more from more swaps? I mean, sure, I think everybody could learn, something from everybody else, but I think they were able to check off the important boxes there, which were teaching people simple domain that needed to have a defense, should Sukuna do that, and two, teaching people RCT that didn't have it. So I think they were able to get the big, most important things out of the way. But yeah, certainly, everybody getting a little more experience here and there would have helped. Next up, we got a few questions from Sam here. The first one is, why didn't Sukuna use Hollow Wicker Basket against Yuji's domain? He had all his hands back. And he did. He did use Hollow Wicker Basket. That is what was protecting him in the immediate after effect of the domain when him and Yuji first started fighting. Yuji basically was able to start breaking through it, and then Nobara's resonance happened, and that's just what caught Sukuna all completely off guard. But he was using Hollow Wicker Basket. Next, do all curse techniques have an associated domain expansion? I think all curse techniques could theoretically have a domain expansion, yes, but the domain is a projection of your innate domain with the curse technique attached to it. So could somebody have a domain expansion just without the curse technique bound to it? Like, could they project their innate domain just as is? And I guess theoretically yes, but considering like how labor and energy intensive that is, I guess there's really no point for somebody to spend the time to try to do that if they don't have a curse technique they're going to imbue in it. But I guess it would theoretically be possible for someone without a curse technique to bring their innate domain into reality. And then finally, Rika versus Maharaga, now that we know that the RCT blade won't work against her. I don't think we know that for sure, but just because she can perform RCT, I do agree that it stands to reason RCT isn't going to destroy her, but still Rika is some kind of weird amalgamation, right? Not quite Curse Spirit, not quite Shikigami, in my opinion. So whether or not the blade would work on her, I do think Rika is capable of beating Maharaga, assuming Rika knows the trick to Maharaga. So assuming Rika knows that she needs to take Maharaga out in one go as soon as possible, then I do think she's capable of that. And next up, right on this same Rika subject, we've got this one from Branwin, who is a YouTube member, so shout out to you. Thank you so much for that. He wants to know, if Rika is a curse technique, does that mean when she performs RCT, she's reversing herself? So this is in reference to how in the fan book, Gege calls Rika Yuta's curse technique. So I think we still don't truly know how to classify Rika, but no. Rika, if we do even want to just look at her as Yuta's curse technique, her performing RCT wouldn't be the reversal of herself. that would be curse technique reversal, which would be the act of funneling positive cursed energy through Yuta's curse technique. So if we imagine that Rika is Yuta's curse technique, then she's been manifested, right? She exists thanks to Yuta's curse technique. Then she just performs RCT, which is the act of creating positive cursed energy. She wouldn't be reversed unless, again, this is all hypothetical, but unless Yuta channeled positive cursed energy through his curse technique. So Yuta would seemingly be the one capable of reversing Rika, whatever that means. Rika wouldn't necessarily be capable of it, but she is capable of performing reverse curse technique. All very confusing terminology, but I hope that makes sense. Next up, we got this from Theatrix. No question, no theory, really just some kind words. So thank you so much, man. I'm really glad you were able to find the channel and enjoy this journey along with me. Thanks for being you, and I really appreciate the kindness, man. Next up, we got a question from Memezato on open domains, and y'all pause to read the whole thing, but he says, why can only Kinjaku and Sukuna do this? Do you think Gojo has the potential to learn it? And I think Kinjaku and Sukuna are the only ones that know it because they have reached that level of mastery in barrier techniques. I don't think it's like something you're innately born with. Like, I don't think you're born with an open domain or anything like that. I think that's a level of dedication and genius that it takes to achieve that. So could Gojo do it? Yes, I think Gojo is capable of that. Why didn't he? Well, he was in the heat of battle, and I think, that just wasn't like the move that needed to be made at the time. Also, we have no idea how two open barriers would even interact, right? It makes sense how one closed and one open interact because they can like both simultaneously exist. But if two open were to clash, how would they even overlap, right? So it might have even just been a practical thing in Gege's mind to not have Gojo develop that, because this way they were able to be equally refined and still coexist. So I think on kind of a meta level, that might be why. But yes, I do think Gojo is capable of it, like assuming a hypothetical universe where he just takes time out of his day to train and like try to focus and hone that. I think he could do it. Do I think it's a domain, or excuse me, do I think open domain is a mark of Jujutsu higher than Gojo's level? And in that respect, yes. I think that, just the way the narrator put it when Sukuna opened his, it's a divine technique. He's painting on thin air. So in that respect, yes, I think it is a more sophisticated technique than what Gojo is capable of. But again, all that being said, they were stated to be equally refined. So their domains were equal, but it's like we can both, shoot a free throw, but LeBron James is going to be much more beautiful and like technically perfect than mine, even if we both make it, if that makes sense. So I think Sukuna is just a little bit higher in that regard. And then finally, if so, is Kenjaku's knowledge of Jujutsu much higher than Gojo's? And I would say in that respect, yes. And I do think just Kenjaku is a student of the game more so than Gojo. Gojo is a genius as well, but he also has all of this insane talent to package with it. Kinjaku, not having that talent, kind of had to compensate in genius. So in certain respects, yes, I would say Kinjaku's knowledge of Jujutsu is better than Gojo's, but I wouldn't say that that means he's better than Gojo, obviously. Next up, Deregwe asks, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, says, how would red scale change the 1v1 between Yuji and Sukuna? And that's certainly interesting to think about, right? Like, what if Yuji had also, like, fully mastered blood manipulation before going into that fight? I think it would have obviously helped him, but red scale specifically, and even if he had, like, fully mastered all aspects of blood manipulation, I don't know if it really would have moved the needle that much. Like, yes, Yuji is stronger, but given the objective and what needed to happen, I don't think it plays that big of a role, because it was Yuji's soul punches that were really the issue and the problem for Sukuna, right? So even if red scale had made Yuji, like, his punches hit physically harder, that really wasn't even going to matter that much, because again, it was the soul aspect that was really, the main thing there and why Yuji was so effective against Sukuna. I think if anything, it would have just been beneficial for its durability increase from Yuji to help him defend against Sukuna. Next up, we got another one from Sam who says, apologies, but it's too much copium. And y'all pause to read it, but this is in reference to my Gojo clock theory, basically saying that the 8 minutes late, the 2:21 referring to Gojo getting out of the prison realm, the 29-minute difference, all that jazz is just too much reading between the lines. And hey, you might be completely right. I'm not saying that we're guaranteed a Gojo comeback or anything, but the alternative being that all of those details just so perfectly lining up with Gojo illusions being just completely random chance is also a bit ridiculous in my opinion. Like, if it does end up leading to nothing, then I'm more inclined to believe Gege did it intentionally as a troll than it being just random chance. Next up, we got a few questions from Appo College, so let's run through these one by one. Starting with, couldn't everyone have placed an overtime-like binding vow on themselves to time it where they get the boost sometime before or during the fight with Sukuna? And yeah, I think theoretically anyone probably could emulate Nanami's binding vow of restricting himself during the day to get a bonus at night. But I think the main reason this wasn't utilized is because they didn't have perfect information. They didn't know how this fight was going to go. They didn't know what the window where they would need to be boosted was gonna be. So I think that's probably the main reason why, something like that wasn't explicitly planned for. And then how might it have changed Gojo's first attack? I don't really think it would have, because I mean, he already did kind of, I don't want to say cheat, but he already used all of the buffs that he could get from his support classes with Gakuganji and Urahime and also Ijichi making it a blind attack, right? But I think that attack was mainly just to serve as a flex, you're the challenger here. I don't think Gojo was actually trying to one-shot KO Sukuna in that moment. So I don't think even if he had another slight boost from a hypothetical overtime that anything would have changed there. Next, could Gojo have stood a better chance if he teleported more? We know he teleported out of Jogo's domain, so why not teleport out of Sukuna's range, go back and get healed? So a lot of people ask, why don't we see Gojo teleport more? Specifically in reference to the Sukuna fight. And my thought process on that is that, one, we know that for Gojo to teleport, he has to do hand signs at the very least. He can't just instant transmission, all around at will. So for the circumstances of the fight with Sukuna, I don't think it was ever really beneficial for him to teleport. He was always just right in the fray, in the fight. Gojo was never running away. And if he had been, then I think teleporting would have made a lot of sense. But when he was in the domain, he was in the domain. He was clashing. He was trying to win. Retreat was never on his mind. You got to remember that this is the best fight he's ever had in his entire life, right? The 6 Eyes Limitless user, the strongest, the honored one. He was loving every minute of truly getting to test himself. So I don't think the idea of running away to get healed and then coming back even crossed his mind. And also he didn't teleport out of Jogo's domain. He just he opened Unlimited Void and just destroyed Jogo's domain. Next up, if Gojo learned about the soul or read Yuki's book, do you think he could have used Hollow Purple on the soul with certain binding vows? And no, I don't think so, because, for example, if I read 35 books on how to dunk a basketball, I'm not just going to be able to magically do it. Except maybe that's not the best example, because I bet I could. Give me a few months to train specifically to do that. I bet I could. But no, I just don't think that that's something you can just learn from a scholastic standpoint. I think Yuji is capable of that because of the unique situation of housing 2 souls within him. So I think it takes something like that, or a natural born thing that you have, and not something that you can just learn. Next, could Yuta copy 10 Shadows if Rika had eaten a piece of Megami? And yeah, I think hypothetically, sure. But we do know there are certain restrictions on that. He would probably have to eat a very large portion of Megami given how strong 10 Shadows is. So I would imagine it would probably be a lethal situation to Megami in order for Yuta to fully utilize the 10 Shadows, potentially a Maharaga situation or stuff like that. So I just don't really think that was on the table. Plus, Megami was gone by the time, he was Sukuna at that point. So they didn't really have that opportunity. But Yuta with a theoretical Maharaga that he had full control of would certainly help, right? But I still think Sukuna beats Yuta in a one-on-one. And then finally, what's the opposite of a curse? When faith, hope, and positive energy from humans gathers up, is that a blessing? And, that seemingly doesn't exist, at least not in the same form in the world of JJK. I would say a sage would be the opposite of a curse, and there don't seem to be sage entities, but that could be a powerful force that, does work on the world. Maybe it's called destiny, maybe it's called fate, I don't know, but at the very least, there don't seem to be entities akin to cursed spirits in that regard. Next up, we got some last-minute theories from Greasy that get increasingly more crackpot, so this should be fun. Y'all pause to read these in full, but the first one says, the sequel series doesn't have to be about the next generation like many people think. If we have a Clan War sequel, Yuji could still be the MC serving as a character on the outside looking in. And yeah, certainly, if we get a part 2, I think Gege could do literally whatever he wants from it. We could get a time skip and it's a completely whole set of different characters in this world, or it could be an immediate part 2, still dealing with the aftermath of all of these things with Yuji still as the MC. Hell, we could get a prequel, just not even about anything we know about, but during the Heian era or whatever, and I would be here for any of them. But speaking on the clan war stuff, in case those of you out there that are wondering about this too that didn't see my video, chapter 269 was not setting up a clan war part 2. It still might happen, like we might get a clan war part 2, but that's not what was going on with Mei Mei and the old woman. So check out my videos if you were confused about that. Then this next one wonders like what Gojo and Yuji's conversation might have been. Could it have been about Yuji's heritage, or maybe Gojo suggesting to Yuji to not kill Sukuna because just allow him to live on within him. So yeah, this is one of the things that you know, as you guys all know, I do think we have more coming from Gojo. Not necessarily a comeback, maybe a comeback, but not necessarily, just more characterization in some form or fashion. And so that conversation with Yuji is one thing I would love to see, right? It would have presumably happened, or would have had to have happened before the fight. So I don't know if Gojo would have, you know, necessarily had the foregone conclusion that he knew Sukuna would live and like that Yuji would have that choice, but I do easily think it's something they could have talked about. Like Yuji maybe would have talked to his sensei about that. Like, hey, if we are successful with this, I'm thinking I want to offer Sukuna a chance to live on within me. Like, what do you think? Like, so I think that would have been a really cool conversation if they had. And I do think Gojo would have been on board with it, because we know that Gojo was never planning on killing Yuji. Like, so I think whatever the case, assuming they didn't know a way to permanently rid of Sukuna otherwise, maybe Angel's Curse technique. But yeah, if not, then I think Gojo had to have assumed that Sukuna was going to continue to live on, at least in some form or fashion, right? And then finally, we will see Sukuna inside his new prison. Either him like trash talking Yuji and Yuji's unbothered, or some Truman Show type shit where Sukuna's given a new life but doesn't know that he's in a world created by Yuji. So as you know, I too think Sukuna is living on within Yuji, so I hope we get some glimpse of that. But the Truman Show idea is really cool. I never thought about that, but considering what we saw Yuji's domain do, that would be fascinating if he like created some like alternate reality for him to live in. I don't think this is the most likely, but like you said, they get increasingly more crackpot, so you know, I'm here for it. Next up, we got this one from OG Ghosty. Y'all pause to read it, but it's a theory about how Kenny will come back, but within Gojo. Again, speaking to his brilliance with the curse technique and his barrier techniques, that he was able to like live on within Yuta when Rika ate the brain, and that somehow he now has gone to Gojo due to all of the nuance in that situation. Similar to what we talked about with I think it was the first question in this video. And yeah, I certainly think this is possible. I would love it if so. You know, it would mean a not true Gojo comeback, but I'd be here for the Kinjaku comeback in any form or fashion. I would pray we got a part 2 if that was the case, and this wasn't somehow just like left on an open-ended cliffhanger for us to wonder about, or somehow resolved in a single chapter, but we'll see. Next, we got this from Rakeem, who says, can you do a Yuji at the end of JJK versus all of the other special grades in the series? Also, could you include Toji and Maki? All right, so yeah, let's talk about this. And I will say that this also might be a video I make after JJK fully ends, because we'll need some, you know, fun ideas to talk about once the manga ends, waiting for anime season 3. And also just in case we find out anything more about Yuji and his domain and his power in these last 2 chapters. But as it stands right now, I think he beats Geto. I think he loses to Yuta right now, just due to a domain refinement situation. I think Yuta's domain is going to be more refined. He's got more things in the arsenal that I think he can stop Yuji with, plus Rika, right? It's a 2v1. I do think Yuji ultimately will beat Yuta, but right now I gotta give the edge to him. Gojo obviously beats Yuji. Yuki, I think Yuji can beat. He can't do anything against the black hole, but the black hole is like a win condition against anyone, really, right? So black hole withstanding, I do think he beats Yuki. And I think he claps both Maki and Toji, honestly. Like, he basically is on their level physically, maybe a little bit under, but then he has everything else that they don't have. So he beats both of them, and he loses to Sukuna, obviously. Next up, we got a few questions from Zerings here, so y'all pause to read it, but I'm actually going to answer these out of order, starting with these 2 down here. Why did Toto pull up so late after Yuta? Why couldn't he help inside Yuta's domain? And why didn't Yuta, Yuji, Rika, Toto, and Maki all jump in the domain to try to deal with Sukuna? And this was just all part of the plan they had orchestrated that they thought was the safest for everyone. They wanted to see if just Yuji and Yuta could get the job done in the domain without risking all of those other people people, because really it was just a countdown timer to when Sukuna would get his domain back. And the moment he did, everyone was obviously in grave danger. So that's why specifically Toto stayed back, so that he could swap people with Mei's crows should Sukuna ever open the domain again. And then why was Toto's arm still wrapped? Good question. Gege even mentioned it. All right, so our next question comes from John the Human, and he wants to know, if I could choose the copy techniques in Yuta's arsenal, what would I want him to have? Imagine he had all the techniques of both the modern era and the past. Yeah, he would be incredible if he just had all of these techniques. But the main issue is we know the requirements of them now, that people basically have to have a large portion of them consumed, assuming it's a powerful technique, that can't be healed. So obviously Yuta is not going to cripple or handicap his friends and loved ones in order to get their techniques. So that obviously puts a huge bar on the things he's going to realistically have access to. But maybe you're not asking me that. Maybe you're just saying hypothetically. So hypothetically, I think it would be incredible if he was able to get the 10 shadows, if he was able to get Yuki's technique, the Bombaye. The most incredible one he could feasibly get, in my opinion, though, would be Mahito's Idol Transfiguration, which we've never seen Yuta copy the technique of a cursed spirit, but I don't see why it wouldn't work. So if he had just been able to have Rika scarf up Mahito instead of him getting absorbed by Kinjaku, that would have just been a massive game changer, right? So I think that one for sure. The Limitless, he's not really going to be able to do much with without the 6 eyes, so that wouldn't do much. But yeah, I think Yuki, Mahito, it'd be cool if he could copy Boogie Woogie as well, if he'd been able to eat that severed hand that Toto left on the ground. But yeah, I think for the most part, realistically, he's not going to be able to get too many techniques unless they're from enemies that he just has Riki consume, because, again, he's not going to want to hurt his friends. Next up here, speaking of Yuta and the copies, we have a long comment here from Emil. Y'all can pause to read it. This actually isn't even all of it, but essentially to boil this down here is Emil had some questions on the way Shinjuku could have actually played out, because we know 269 was Gege kind of answering the questions through these characters of why didn't we do this? Why didn't we do that? And here Emil says that, that wasn't just the flawless logic we thought it was. It actually could have gone different ways, so that's wrong. And here's what I'll say just in general before I dive into the specific example here, is that, yeah, at the end of the day, we're probably gonna be able to theorize different conceivable pathways that diverge from what we actually saw that might have worked against Sukuna. I think that's just, the nature of a story down to some point. Like, there's gonna be some thing we think of, or well, they could have done this, that, or the other combined with this at this perfect moment, and it might have worked, right? So I think it's probably not too fruitful to just go through a million what ifs on like, well, why didn't they do this? Why didn't they do that? Because, at the end of the day, it is a piece of fiction. So what I'll say is that, I don't think that chapter necessarily was serving as it only could have happened this way and no other way, but was just kind of, again, them kind of exercising their, emotional states and regrets and grief over this traumatic experience they went through. And like, couldn't we have done this? Like, then everything would have been fine. We would have been fixed, like, why didn't we do this? So I think it does serve a dual purpose of like being an emotional catharsis for the characters beyond just Gege speaking to the audience, but it obviously has the added benefit of Gege speaking to the audience about some of those more popular fan theories, right? Anyway, I'm getting long-winded. The point is, I think we could sit here long enough and find some other ways it could have gone, and that's just, again, the nature of fiction. But specifically to your idea of why didn't Yuta record curse speech in a recorder, and they could have used that in the Higuruma fight. I think the main issue with this is we don't know the nuance of how that would work with Rika, because like you mentioned, Rika does need to be, her 5 minutes of fully active in order for Yuta to access his copied curse techniques. So if he did activate, Rika 3 days before the Sukuna fight, record curse speech, and then the 5 minutes end, would the recorder even have maintained its, activeness? Maybe it would have fallen off depending on how the nature of that copy ability actually works. We don't know, right? And if it would have, and they would have had to have waited until the 5 minutes to be able to do that and make that tape recorder work within that 5 minute window, then that becomes really iffy, right? That's going to be a massive gamble that they can pull that off. And so I think that's why they wouldn't have done it. And if we do just assume that the tape would have maintained after the 5 minutes, that still brings a whole host of problems, because even if Yuta was strong enough to tank the backlash, which is why Inumaki didn't do it earlier, right? Because Sukuna was too strong at that point and it would have like killed him. So if we just assume that Yuta was strong enough to survive that, then yes, he could have hypothetically been healed with RCT and stuff, but at that point, they would have not known when it would activate it, right? And Yuta was in a very important mission against Kinjaku. So what if like right when they went to strike is when the recorder had played and Yuta just gets blasted out of nowhere? Then the Kinjaku attack wouldn't have been successful, right? And these are just like a couple of random examples. So I think that like, you know, while we could, again, maybe think of ways Shinjuku could have gone, I think there's always also the devil's advocate plan of, well, you know, maybe it wouldn't have worked because of this. So, yeah, long and the short of this explanation is I do think we could find other paths, but it's probably just, you know, an infinite cycle of what ifs that's probably not too fruitful to spend too much time on. Next up, we got this from Tiberius, who is a YouTube member, so shout out and thank you for being a part of the community, man. But he just says, seeing Haruta and Momo side by side made me realize Haruta is basically Lucky Momo with a ponytail, and yeah, can't unsee. And then finally for this video, we got this from It's the DNA, who says, what do you think Sukuna meant when he said to Jogo, I guess a cursed spirit wouldn't know, in reference to when he first used his furnace against him? And great question. I don't think we have like an easy answer to this still. So my best guess right now is that perhaps it's in relation to the technique seemingly being tied to the kitchen in a way, you know, cleave and dismantle being the preparation of the food, the furnace being the stove. Maybe it's because cursed spirits don't eat that Jogo wouldn't have been able to make that connection, where perhaps maybe a sorcerer or somebody else from, you know, the more Heian era time of things would have picked up on. But I don't know. Like, I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts on maybe what Sukuna meant. Anyways, y'all, that's going to do it for this one. Thank you guys so much for sending in your questions and your support. I cannot believe we are nearing the end of this story. Chapter 270 tonight. So join the Discord. Come hang out with us.